The gala was supposed to be a celebration, a night of glamour, lights, and powerful women, each recognized for their achievements, their influence, their impact. The red carpet was lined with Hollywood's most elite, cameras flashing relentlessly, each click capturing the elegance, the poise, and the aura of absolute perfection. But for one woman, the night quickly became something else entirely. By the time the evening drew to a close, whispers had turned into gasps, and curiosity turned into scandal. She couldn't bear the shame. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, found herself at the center of a story no one could have predicted. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But what really happened that night? How did a woman so accustomed to attention, admiration, and a global platform suddenly find herself being forced out, humiliated in front of some of the world's most powerful A-listers? And why is this story hitting headlines now, weeks after the gala, with insider accounts revealing details that were meant to stay hidden behind velvet ropes? To understand the magnitude of this moment, we need to step back and examine the event itself. L'Oréal Paris's Women of Worth Gala is not just any celebration. This was the 20th anniversary of a tradition that honors women who have shaped industries, broken barriers, and inspired countless others. The event is more than an awards ceremony. It is a statement, a spectacle, a gathering where influence and power are on full display. Celebrities, CEOs, philanthropists, and socialites converge under one roof, and the unspoken rules are as rigid as any royal protocol. Invitations are coveted. The guest list is curated with precision. Every interaction, every glance, every handshake is scrutinized. For Meghan, someone who has spent years navigating both the royal spotlight and Hollywood's unforgiving glare, this was supposed to be another stage, another opportunity to shine. And yet, from the moment she arrived, the atmosphere shifted. Cameras panned, but not all attention was flattering. Subtle glances, quiet whispers, and invisible barriers began to appear. The warmth of acknowledgement that many expected to greet her was replaced by a tension that was impossible to ignore. Meghan's entry, which should have been a triumph, instead became the first scene of a drama that no one could script. So how did this happen? The accounts from multiple insiders paint a picture of meticulous planning, unexpected clashes, and social hierarchies that Meghan may have underestimated. In a world where appearances are everything and reputations are currency, her presence seemed to disturb the balance. There were murmurs before the event even began. Some guests reportedly questioned why she had been invited. Others speculated that her inclusion was more about optics than merit. And as the evening progressed, those murmurs would turn into a moment that no one present would forget. Imagine the tension in the air. The room was lit with crystal chandeliers that cast sparkling reflections across designer gowns. The smell of fine cuisine and floral arrangements filled the space. Laughter and conversation flowed, punctuated by the occasional cheer as awards were announced. Yet beneath this veneer of celebration, a drama was quietly unfolding. Meghan, accustomed to commanding attention, was suddenly confronted with the reality that not every room is ready to welcome her. Every smile she attempted, every nod she offered, was met with subtle resistance, a polite yet firm reminder that she was, in that room, an outsider to some. And then came the whispers, the real turning point. Security personnel, typically invisible at such events, began to appear in unexpected places. The question arises, why would a woman of Meghan's stature, someone who has navigated countless public appearances, need to be monitored so closely? The answer lies in a combination of Hollywood politics, celebrity dynamics, and, perhaps, personal grudges. What unfolded next was a spectacle of social maneuvering, a demonstration of how the very people who celebrate achievement can also enforce the strictest of hierarchies. As the night continued, Meghan's attempts to engage were met with polite but unmistakable resistance. Seating arrangements, usually a minor detail, became a subtle battlefield. Who was allowed to sit near whom? Who could share the stage? Who could be photographed together? Each decision carried weight. And in this delicate dance of status and visibility, Meghan found herself increasingly isolated. Friends, colleagues, and even casual acquaintances seemed to subtly step aside. And when she attempted to make light of the situation, jokes and laughter were met with awkward pauses. It was a room where perception mattered more than reality, and Meghan's presence was creating a ripple she had not anticipated. Now, you might be wondering, surely, Meghan is no stranger to high-stakes social environments. She's walked red carpets, attended royal functions, and hosted global events. She has a reputation for poise, diplomacy, and charm. But what makes this story different is the convergence of Hollywood hierarchy and personal perception. Here was a woman who had once been celebrated for her marriage to a prince, for her activism, for her elegance, suddenly confronted by a reality where neither title nor accomplishments guaranteed respect. And as the evening progressed, it became clear that the gala's orchestrators were prepared to enforce the social boundaries in ways that were as dramatic as they were calculated. Insider accounts suggest that the tension reached a crescendo during the moments when Meghan tried to engage with other A-listers. Conversations she initiated were politely cut short, cameras shifted focus, and the subtle choreography of exclusivity became undeniable. Security personnel were reportedly instructed to guide her away from certain areas, a maneuver designed to minimize her visibility. And for someone so accustomed to attention, the experience was reportedly humiliating. The humiliation was not overt or confrontational. It was the quiet, pervasive kind that makes the heart race and the mind question every move. It is the kind of embarrassment that is amplified by cameras, whispers, and an audience of thousands, both present and online. But here's the question we need to ask ourselves. What does it take for a person like Meghan Markle to reach a point where leaving becomes the only option? What combination of social pressure, personal awareness, and external manipulation can drive someone to step away from an event they were invited to attend? And why has this story captured the attention of Hollywood insiders, media outlets, and the public alike? The answers lie in a web of social cues, calculated moves, and human emotion that few are prepared to witness firsthand. This was not just an evening of awards and glamour. It was a lesson in power, perception, and influence. The moments leading to Meghan's exit were filled with tension, subtle power plays, and a growing realization that no amount of charm or diplomacy could change the unfolding narrative. Every step, every gesture, every glance was scrutinized, creating an environment where even the smallest misstep felt monumental. And yet, the most shocking part of the night was not just Meghan's isolation, but how quickly it escalated. What began as polite distance and subtle cues evolved into a situation that could not be ignored. Guests whispered, cameras captured fleeting expressions, and security movements signaled that something was about to happen. The build-up, carefully crafted behind the scenes, culminated in a moment that would become the talk of Hollywood, a public, unmistakable response to Meghan's presence that few had anticipated. So, why should this story matter to you, the viewer? Beyond celebrity gossip, beyond red carpets and designer gowns, this is a tale of human vulnerability, social hierarchy, and the consequences of visibility. It is about how even the most experienced public figures can find themselves navigating spaces where every action is judged, every move interpreted, and every presence contested. And it asks a broader question. In a world obsessed with image and influence, who really controls the narrative, and at what cost? By the end of this video, you will hear details of the moments that led Meghan to leave the gala, the reactions of those around her, and the ripple effects that continue to shape both her public image and Hollywood's social landscape. But for now, imagine standing in a room where every eye is on you, but the warmth you expect is replaced by cold calculation. Imagine realizing that no matter how carefully you plan, no matter how elegantly you dress, the invisible rules of power can shift beneath your feet in an instant. And just as the gala seemed to reach its peak, the event that no one anticipated occurred. Meghan Markle, the woman who has navigated more public scrutiny than most could imagine, found herself confronted with a moment of truth that was impossible to ignore. She couldn't bear the shame, the whispers, the quiet isolation. And in front of Hollywood's most powerful figures, she made a decision that would set off a chain reaction, a decision to leave. The red carpet is more than just a strip of fabric underfoot. It is a stage, a spotlight, a battleground. Every step, every glance, every smile is scrutinized, For most celebrities, it's a place to shine, to be celebrated, and to perform the persona the world expects. But for Meghan Markle, the red carpet at L'Oréal Paris's 20th Anniversary Women of Worth Gala would quickly become something far more complicated, a stage where every move carried weight, every interaction felt loaded, and every gaze had a hidden meaning. As Meghan stepped out of her limousine, cameras exploded into flashes. Paparazzi, armed with lenses capable of capturing the smallest detail, angled for the perfect shot. The crowd gasped, murmured, and whispered. The question on everyone's mind: why was Meghan Markle here, and how would she navigate the room filled with Hollywood royalty? Her gown sparkled under the lights, a couture choice meant to convey elegance and power. But elegance alone would not be enough tonight. The red carpet is often a place where first impressions define the entire night. Celebrities smile, pose, and engage with reporters, carefully balancing authenticity with performance. Meghan attempted the same, offering polite nods and warm smiles. Yet, from the moment she arrived, there was a subtle shift in energy, a tension that insiders would later describe as palpable. She was welcomed with professional courtesy, but there was a cold undertone, a sense that she was an outsider in a world she had once navigated with ease. What made this moment unusual was not the attention Meghan attracted. She has always drawn a crowd, but the nature of that attention. Normally, media coverage is celebratory, amplifying glamour and success. This night, however, cameras captured fleeting expressions that hinted at unease, subtle glances from fellow A-listers, brief hesitations in conversations, and quiet shifts in posture when she approached. These seemingly small details are the unspoken language of the red carpet. They tell a story that words cannot fully capture, a narrative of inclusion and exclusion that sets the tone for the evening. And it wasn't just the media observing. Hollywood insiders, socialites, and longtime attendees of the gala watched every interaction. Seating arrangements, introductions, and even proximity to certain high-profile figures are choreographed long before the event begins. The gala's organizers maintain an intricate balance of recognition and prestige, ensuring that power dynamics are carefully preserved. Meghan's presence, some insiders suggest, disrupted that balance. Whether intentional or accidental, she was suddenly a variable that could not be ignored. As she walked down the red carpet, Meghan attempted to engage. She waved, offered handshakes, and even exchanged a few words with familiar faces. But not all responses were warm. Some smiles were measured, polite but distant. Some greetings were brief, almost perfunctory. And some faces, previously friendly or neutral, subtly shifted, signaling that boundaries had been drawn. In Hollywood, this is a form of silent communication, a way of asserting influence without confrontation. It's a reminder that even in moments of glamour, social hierarchies are always at play. Imagine for a moment the internal calculation happening in Meghan's mind. She has navigated global scrutiny before, from royal duties to media storms. She knows how to perform under pressure. But the red carpet is a different kind of battlefield. Here, prestige and power operate according to unspoken rules. One misstep, a glance too long, a laugh too loud, an entrance too bold, can become fodder for gossip, headlines, and social media speculation. Every move she made was a careful negotiation of visibility and influence. The photographers, too, were playing a role. A well-timed photo can elevate a celebrity's status. A poorly timed one can create embarrassment or misinterpretation. As Meghan posed for pictures, some lenses captured her in moments of unease, slightly strained smiles, brief hesitations, subtle glances to assess reactions. The images, innocuous to some, would later be analyzed by tabloids, commentators, and social media, each reading something different into her expressions. For a woman so familiar with public scrutiny, the pressure of microanalysis is intense. But the tension was not entirely external. Meghan's awareness of her surroundings added another layer of complexity. She was acutely aware that she was not just navigating a room. She was navigating perception itself. Every step on that red carpet was a negotiation of identity. The royal, the celebrity, the advocate, the outsider. The challenge was compounded by the knowledge that she was being observed not only by the media, but also by fellow attendees. many of whom had their own stake in maintaining social order. And then came the whispers. They started as soft murmurs among a small group of A-listers, barely audible to the untrained ear. "She shouldn't be here," one reportedly said. "Why is she at our table?" another asked. These comments, though discreet, were amplified by the environment. In a room filled with people attuned to social nuance, even a whisper travels quickly. Meghan, ever perceptive, likely noticed the shift in energy. And the question arises: how does one maintain composure when the very room that is meant to celebrate women is subtly signaling exclusion? It's also important to consider the history and context of the gala. The Women of Worth event is designed to honor achievement, resilience, and impact. Guests are expected to embody these qualities. But in practice, the gala is also a social ecosystem, a microcosm of influence where status, reputation, and visibility are closely guarded. For Meghan, a woman who has experienced both adulation and scrutiny on a global scale, the rules of this ecosystem might have seemed familiar, yet they operated differently here. What she may have perceived as admiration or courtesy could have been interpreted by others as overstepping, threatening, or even inappropriate. As the red carpet proceedings continued, Meghan's presence began to elicit subtle interventions. Security personnel, who are typically unobtrusive, started positioning themselves strategically. Photographers were subtly redirected. Conversations nearby seemed to pause when she approached. This was not overt confrontation. It was a coordinated, almost invisible effort to manage the flow of attention. And for someone like Meghan, trained to read both overt and subtle social cues, the realization that her presence was being actively managed must have been unsettling. Yet despite these challenges, Meghan continued to engage. She maintained her poise, smiled for the cameras, and attempted to interact with other guests. But the cracks in the evening's veneer were becoming increasingly apparent. The atmosphere, once celebratory, had shifted to one of tension and scrutiny. Every gesture, every interaction, was laden with meaning. And in Hollywood, meaning is often more important than intention. By the time Meghan reached the main entrance of the gala, it was clear to observers that something was different. The energy around her was charged, and subtle divisions among attendees were visible. Some moved toward her, offering genuine warmth. Others maintained a polite distance, as if signaling a boundary that could not be crossed. For an outsider watching this play out, the contrast between the glamour of the red carpet and the undercurrents of social tension was striking. And then, the first real sign that the evening might take a dramatic turn appeared. Security, previously stationed discreetly, began to position themselves more visibly near Meghan. Not to threaten, not to intervene physically, but to guide, to direct, to control the flow of movement. A red flag in any social setting. This was a signal that something was amiss. The crowd may not have fully realized it at the time, but insiders would later describe it as a critical turning point. So, what does all this mean for Meghan Markle? Here was a woman stepping into a room she had been invited to, dressed to impress, armed with grace and experience, yet confronted with a reality she could neither fully predict nor control. The red carpet, a symbol of glamour and celebration, had become the stage for the first act of what would soon unfold as public embarrassment. And the question lingers. How does someone navigate visibility when the very structures designed to celebrate them are subtly, quietly, and inexorably closing in? By the end of the red carpet, Meghan had already experienced a series of microaggressions, subtle exclusions, and quiet judgments that would set the tone for the rest of the evening. The tension was no longer invisible, it was tangible. And though she had maintained her composure in public, insiders report that the moment was already shaping her decisions for the rest of the night. What started as an arrival intended to project confidence and elegance had become a delicate negotiation of presence, perception, and power. And just as she crossed the threshold into the gala itself, the scene was set for the events that would soon make headlines around the world. The red carpet had been just the beginning, a prelude to a drama that no one anticipated. At first glance, a gala guest list seems like a simple matter. Names on a page, invitations sent, RSVPs received. But anyone familiar with Hollywood knows that there is nothing simple about the VIP list. It is a map of influence, a blueprint of social power, and, in many ways, the invisible architecture of the evening. Who is seated next to whom? Who is allowed on stage? Who is photographed together? These decisions are meticulously planned and guarded with a level of precision few outsiders can comprehend. For Meghan Markle, stepping into this carefully orchestrated world would soon prove more complicated than anyone could have predicted. The 20th Anniversary Women of Worth Gala had already drawn a constellation of Hollywood elites, award-winning actors, influential directors, top executives, philanthropists, and longtime socialites. Every attendee had a carefully cultivated reputation, a story, a position to maintain. And at the heart of it all, the organizers, experts in managing not just appearances but influence, held the ultimate power, the guest list. It's easy to underestimate the significance of this list, but in Hollywood, it can make or break social standing. Being included signals acceptance, influence, and respect. Being excluded or strategically placed on the periphery sends a subtle but unmistakable message. And this is where Meghan Markle's presence immediately disrupted the balance. Sources at the gala later described a sense of unease among certain attendees before she even arrived. Some questioned why she had been invited. Others speculated that her inclusion was more about optics, a nod to her fame rather than her accomplishments or contributions to the evening's cause. This is a familiar tension in Hollywood. Recognition is intertwined with politics, and visibility is currency. For someone who had spent years managing both royal and celebrity scrutiny, Meghan must have sensed the undercurrent almost immediately. The first hint of drama came with the seating arrangements. At most galas, seating charts are carefully designed to ensure harmony, maximize networking opportunities, and avoid potential conflicts. Guests are placed strategically, sometimes for optics, sometimes to keep sensitive personalities apart. But when Meghan's name appeared on the VIP list, it apparently caused a ripple. Certain tables were rearranged, some seats left intentionally vacant, and whispers of disapproval circulated quietly among organizers and select attendees. It's not just who is at the table that matters, it's who they are next to. And for a woman accustomed to commanding attention, the subtle distancing of influential figures was a calculated message. You are not fully part of this inner circle. Insiders reported that the tension around the guest list was compounded by pre-existing dynamics among Hollywood elites. In any social ecosystem, hierarchies exist, and the Women of Worth Gala is no exception. Some A-listers have attended for decades, cultivating relationships that extend beyond the event itself. When an outsider, regardless of fame, enters that ecosystem, it can be perceived as a threat to established order. For Meghan, her global notoriety brought influence, but influence in one sphere does not automatically translate into acceptance in another. And in this environment, the distinction was critical. But the VIP list drama extended beyond seating. Invitations, access passes, and stage visibility all carry weight. Being placed at the main stage, close to presenters and honorees, signals importance. Being relegated to a side table or peripheral area communicates the opposite. Sources indicate that Meghan was initially assigned a prime spot, only for it to be subtly adjusted as the evening approached. It's hard to know whether this was a logistical oversight or a calculated move, but in Hollywood, perception is everything. Even minor adjustments can be interpreted as public statements, particularly when observed by other guests, photographers, and reporters. And then there was the question of introductions. In a room filled with influential figures, introductions are everything. They are opportunities to establish rapport, assert influence, and be seen in the right company. Meghan reportedly made multiple attempts to engage with high-profile attendees, offering polite greetings and conversational overtures. But the responses were mixed, some warm, some distant, and some deliberately curt. According to insiders, certain individuals were instructed, subtly or overtly, to limit interaction, effectively isolating her. It's a subtle form of social engineering, one designed not to provoke conflict, but to enforce hierarchy. And for someone used to navigating visibility, the experience was reportedly frustrating and disorienting. Social media would later amplify these dynamics. Even before the gala began, observers speculated about seating arrangements, predicted interactions, and debated Meghan's position among Hollywood's elite. Every image captured on the red carpet or in candid moments would be analyzed for clues about relationships, status, and influence. In real time, the public watched Meghan navigate an environment where every gesture was magnified, every connection scrutinized, and every misstep potentially headline news. It's an invisible form of pressure, one that few can endure without consequences. And yet, Meghan attempted to maintain her composure. She greeted attendees with a warm smile, engaged in polite conversation, and positioned herself confidently in photographs. But the VIP list was more than a logistical tool. It was a map of inclusion and exclusion. And by the time the evening began, it became clear that she was operating on the edge of social acceptance. The subtle rearrangements of tables, the whispered instructions to staff, and the strategic positioning of security all signaled that her presence was being actively managed. Imagine standing in that room, aware that your placement, visibility, and access are under constant scrutiny. Every handshake, every nod, every laugh becomes a negotiation. Every interaction carries an unspoken question. Does this person accept me? Am I in the inner circle, or am I being subtly marginalized? For Meghan, the VIP list drama was more than just a matter of seating. It was a microcosm of social power, visibility, and perception, played out in real time under the glare of cameras and the judgment of some of Hollywood's most influential figures. Insider sources suggest that the tension reached a critical point when Meghan attempted to engage with certain presenters and honorees. These attempts were reportedly met with polite acknowledgement, but little genuine warmth. Some individuals reportedly shifted away, creating a physical and symbolic barrier. For a woman accustomed to command and recognition, the subtle exclusion must have been felt acutely. And while outwardly the interactions remained civil, the undercurrent of judgment and hierarchy was unmistakable. What makes this story particularly fascinating is the intersection of celebrity, influence, and social perception. Meghan Markle is no stranger to navigating complex environments. From royal ceremonies to high-profile charity events, she has experience managing visibility, expectation, and judgment. But the Women of Worth Gala presented a unique challenge, a space where social dynamics are carefully curated, hierarchies are invisible yet rigid, and the margin for error is virtually non-existent. Here, fame alone does not guarantee respect, and notoriety can even be a liability if it threatens established order. By the time the evening progressed, the impact of the VIP list drama was evident. Meghan's movements, attempts at engagement, and even her placement in photographs were influenced by the subtle interventions of organizers, staff, and influential attendees. What began as polite acknowledgement had evolved into a situation where her presence was being actively managed, almost controlled, in ways that insiders would later describe as humiliating. The stakes were high. Every detail of this carefully orchestrated social ecosystem mattered, and Meghan had suddenly become a focal point of tension. And yet, the full magnitude of what was about to unfold remained unseen. The VIP list drama, while seemingly administrative, had set the stage for the evening's most dramatic moments. The subtle exclusions, strategic adjustments, and whispered conversations created a pressure cooker environment. One that would eventually push Meghan to make a decision that would shock those present and reverberate through the media for days. The question for observers, insiders, and the public alike is this: when does social orchestration cross the line into humiliation? How much can one endure in a room designed to control perception, influence, and hierarchy? And for Meghan Markle, the answer would become painfully clear before the night was over. At the start of any high-profile gala, there's a rhythm, a cadence of greetings, camera flashes, laughter, and applause. But at L'Oréal Paris's 20th Anniversary Women of Worth Gala, that rhythm shifted subtly the moment Meghan Markle entered the main hall. It wasn't loud or confrontational. It was quieter, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable to anyone paying attention. The first sign of trouble was there, like a storm gathering on the horizon, and once it appeared, it was impossible to ignore. From the outset, Meghan attempted to blend poise with approachability. She smiled, engaged in casual conversation, and took in the opulent surroundings. Crystal chandeliers reflected light across the marble floors, and the scent of roses and high-end perfume filled the room. Guests mingled, some moving purposefully toward each other, others floating in conversation clusters. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but the insiders and staff immediately noticed the tension. A subtle shift in posture, a glance withheld, a conversation paused mid-sentence. In Hollywood, these small signals carry enormous weight. The first concrete indication that Meghan's evening was not unfolding as expected came during her initial attempt to approach a table of long-standing A-listers. These were women who had been honored multiple times, who had cultivated decades of influence, and who were regarded as gatekeepers of the gala's inner circle. Meghan's polite greeting was met with polite smiles, but then the smiles faded. Eyes darted around the table, subtle movements suggested hesitation, and a thin line of staff subtly blocked her path without overt explanation. It was not confrontation in the traditional sense, but it was unmistakable. Meghan was being sidelined. The room itself, with all its elegance, seemed to conspire against her. The lighting, which cast flattering glows on everyone else, seemed to catch her at awkward angles. Photographers focused their lenses elsewhere, capturing images of other guests in a way that subtly minimized her visibility. These are the small but deliberate signals that tell someone they are being excluded without uttering a word. Observers report that Meghan's first reaction was to maintain composure. She continued to smile, laughed politely at conversations she could overhear, and attempted to adjust her path through the crowd. But humans are highly attuned to social cues, and no matter how composed, Meghan must have sensed that the evening was beginning to tilt in an unexpected direction. Her attention likely shifted from engagement to assessment, scanning the room for signs of genuine acceptance versus polite avoidance. The trouble escalated quickly when a high-profile presenter passed near Meghan's path. Normally, such moments are opportunities to network or exchange pleasantries. But this time, the presenter's gaze barely acknowledged her presence. An almost imperceptible step aside directed Meghan toward a corridor that led away from the main gathering space. Staff members, strategically positioned, subtly guided her along this route. To an outsider, it might have seemed like coincidence. To insiders, it was a clear signal that her movements were being carefully managed. Adding to the tension were the whispers that began circulating among other attendees. "She shouldn't be here," one guest reportedly said. "She doesn't belong at this table," another whispered, in a tone so soft that only nearby staff could hear. In a room filled with influential people, such murmurs travel quickly, amplified not just by gossip, but by perception. It's one thing to face media scrutiny. It's another entirely to realize that those you hope to connect with may be actively signaling that your presence is unwelcome. The combination of subtle exclusion, orchestrated navigation by staff, and whispered judgments created a mounting pressure. For someone like Meghan, who is accustomed to commanding attention and maintaining control over public perception, this invisible pushback was disorienting. It's one thing to navigate a challenging audience when you know the rules. It's another when the rules themselves are shifting beneath your feet. Each interaction required careful calibration, a mental calculation of how to proceed without creating a scene or inadvertently violating the invisible boundaries set by others. But even as the room's energy began to shift, Meghan attempted to assert her presence in a way that balanced visibility with diplomacy. She approached another cluster of attendees, this time individuals known for their influence in philanthropy and media. Her greeting was warm, professional, and designed to establish rapport. Yet again, subtle resistance emerged. Conversations paused, attention drifted, and she found herself inadvertently standing slightly apart from the group. No words were spoken, no doors were slammed, but the message was clear: she was being contained. Observers at the event note that this is often how social exclusion plays out in elite circles. There is no dramatic confrontation, no overt rebuke. Instead, it manifests through positioning, microgestures, and the management of attention. And when attention is the currency of influence, being denied it, even subtly, is profoundly impactful. Meghan, who has navigated media scrutiny and public attention on a global scale, was experiencing a form of social judgment that cannot be ignored. It's intimate, immediate, and deeply felt. At this point, a direct question arises. How does a person maintain composure when every gesture is being monitored, and every attempted connection is subtly blocked. For Meghan, the answer was to continue outward poise while internally assessing the situation. According to insiders, she moved with grace, smiled when appropriate, and nodded politely, all while scanning the room for allies, potential allies, or signs of genuine engagement. But the tension was growing. What had begun as minor discomfort was evolving into something more substantial, an awareness that she might be actively marginalized in front of an audience that was both live and global. Then came another subtle but telling moment, the first movement of security toward her, not in a threatening way, but in a way that redirected her path, guiding her away from high-profile clusters. Security, in such settings, is typically invisible unless required. The fact that personnel were now strategically present signaled that the organizers were actively managing not just the flow of the event, but her engagement in it. For Meghan, who is known for her awareness and composure, this must have been a jarring realization. And the whispers continued, gaining volume and frequency. Guests who initially offered polite nods began leaning in to comment quietly, sometimes glancing in Meghan's direction to gauge her reaction. The sense of scrutiny intensified. Every smile, every handshake, every step became loaded with meaning. To an outside observer, it may have seemed like ordinary gala dynamics, but insiders described this as a moment when Meghan's carefully constructed environment began to feel hostile, when the invisible rules she was accustomed to navigating no longer applied. Despite all this, she pressed forward, demonstrating poise and diplomacy. She approached the stage to view presentations, greeted attendees when possible, and maintained her public composure. But the combination of subtle exclusion, orchestrated movements by staff, and whispered judgments had already established a pattern for the evening. This pattern, once set, rarely breaks spontaneously. It escalates. And in Meghan's case, it would escalate rapidly. The first sign of trouble was thus more than an isolated incident. It was the opening act in a sequence that would culminate in a dramatic exit. The room had signaled, subtly but unmistakably, that her presence was under scrutiny, her movements were being managed, and her interactions were being limited. And for someone so accustomed to command and visibility, the psychological weight of this reality cannot be overstated. By the time the evening had officially begun, the pattern was clear. Meghan was operating in a space where acceptance was conditional, visibility was controlled, and social cues carried an almost unbearable weight. The first signs of trouble had arrived quietly, subtly, but definitively. And the question now becomes, what happens when the subtle becomes overt, when whispers turn into direct interventions, and when polite exclusion escalates into public embarrassment? The answer, as the rest of the night would reveal, was something no one expected. The first signs of trouble were only the beginning, the subtle hints of a storm that was about to hit full force. In any high-profile event, security is generally a background presence. Invisible to the casual observer, their role is to ensure safety, smooth flow, and discretion. Guests rarely notice the team of professionals managing entrances, exits, and crowd control. But at the L'Oréal Paris 20th Anniversary Women of Worth Gala, the role of security unexpectedly became central to the drama unfolding around Meghan Markle. From the moment Meghan entered the main hall, sources indicate that security personnel began positioning themselves more visibly, not in an overtly confrontational way, but with precise, almost strategic intent. Cameras captured fleeting moments where staff subtly shifted paths, occasionally guiding Meghan away from certain clusters of A-listers. These actions, insiders reveal, were not standard protocol. They were calculated interventions designed to control the flow of interactions. Imagine the pressure. Meghan, already aware of subtle social resistance, now had a physical presence enforcing invisible boundaries around her. Every step she took was being guided, not by her own intent, but by the orchestrated movements of security. For someone accustomed to commanding public attention, this would have been disorienting. The red carpet had already tested her poise. Now, inside the gala, the invisible choreography of exclusion was taking a more tangible form. One of the first noticeable moments occurred when Meghan attempted to approach a table where several honorees were seated. Normally, such approaches are welcomed, even encouraged, as part of networking and social exchange. But this time, Security subtly redirected her path, guiding her toward a less prominent area of the room. No words were exchanged, no confrontation occurred. Yet the message was unmistakable. You are being managed, your movements are being controlled. In Hollywood, where perception is currency, such guidance is a powerful, silent statement. Observers noted that Meghan's reaction was subtle but telling. She maintained her outward composure, smiling politely and engaging when possible. Yet insiders report that she appeared increasingly aware of the restrictive presence surrounding her. The moment was emblematic of an underlying tension: how to navigate an environment designed to control not only who interacts with whom, but how and when. Every gesture, every glance, became a negotiation under scrutiny. It's important to understand the psychology of such interventions. Security at a gala is supposed to protect, not isolate. But when their actions are directed not by safety concerns, but by social strategy, the impact is profound. Meghan was being contained, guided, and subtly restricted, all under the guise of standard protocol. To any outsider, it might have appeared routine, even professional. But for the guest involved, it is an unmistakable signal that her presence is being managed in ways she neither requested nor anticipated. The complexity of the situation was compounded by the sheer visibility of the event. Cameras captured every interaction, movement, and redirection. Photographers trained their lenses on celebrities as they moved through the room, and social media would later amplify every gesture. What might have been a quiet, internal management of a guest became, in effect, a public performance of exclusion. Even those who did not attend the gala would see images and interpret the subtle cues, feeding speculation, commentary, and judgment online. One insider account revealed a particularly telling moment. Meghan attempted to approach a group of media figures for a brief exchange. As she moved closer, a security guard subtly stepped in, redirecting her path toward a corridor and away from the cluster. No words were spoken, but the action conveyed a clear boundary. The insider described Meghan's expression as a mixture of surprise and awareness. She immediately understood the implication. In a room where every glance is meaningful and every interaction scrutinized, the psychological weight of being subtly redirected cannot be understated. The security measures escalated in subtle ways throughout the evening. Staff were strategically positioned near entrances, exits, and high-profile clusters, ensuring Meghan's movements were consistently monitored and guided. Her attempts to mingle with honorees and influencers were limited, either through polite barriers, positioning of tables, or physical presence. Each intervention, though minor on its own, collectively communicated a powerful message. Her visibility was controlled, her interactions curated, and her presence subtly contained. It is worth noting that in high-stakes environments like this gala, these actions are rarely personal attacks. They are strategic decisions. Event organizers carefully manage social hierarchies, optics, and media coverage. However, for the individual involved, particularly someone as experienced in public life as Meghan, the effect is immediate, emotional, and often humiliating. The tension created by security interventions amplified the social pressure she was already experiencing, turning subtle exclusion into a tangible, physical reality. As the evening progressed, Meghan reportedly attempted to assert herself, moving with confidence and engaging politely when possible. Yet each effort was met with subtle redirection. Security, acting under instructions from organizers, ensured she remained within defined boundaries. These movements were precise, deliberate, and, to many observers, unmistakable signals of containment. For a guest accustomed to visibility and influence, the experience was reportedly frustrating and emotionally taxing. But the most critical moment came during a pivotal point in the evening, the awards segment. Meghan intended to approach the stage to congratulate honorees and interact with presenters. However, security strategically guided her away from the main path, diverting her toward a side area. Cameras captured the moment, and images of Meghan stepping aside circulated online almost immediately. The optics of the scene suggested hesitancy or retreat, when in reality, it was orchestrated containment. Yet the public perception was enough to spark commentary, analysis, and speculation. Why was she not at the center of the celebration? Why did it appear she was being excluded? This is where the emotional tension peaked. Meghan's awareness of the manipulation, combined with the subtle social rebukes, created a psychological pressure cooker. Observers report that she appeared increasingly uncomfortable, her smiles more measured, her laughter quieter. The gala, once a celebration of women's achievements, had shifted into a crucible where visibility, control, and perception collided. The first signs of trouble had been subtle, but now the interventions were concrete, visible, and undeniably impactful. The presence of security also had an unintended consequence. It signaled to other guests that Meghan's movements were exceptional, unusual, or potentially problematic. Attendees, already influenced by social hierarchies and perception, interpreted the actions in ways that amplified the isolation. Instead of a glamorous arrival, Meghan's trajectory through the room became a carefully managed narrative, with her actions and visibility orchestrated by others. The subtle but powerful combination of exclusion and containment had begun to erode her ability to navigate the gala with confidence. At this point, the question becomes clear. How much control can one exercise in a space designed to restrict influence and visibility? Meghan had entered the gala expecting to celebrate, to network, and to enjoy the evening. Instead, she found herself in a carefully orchestrated environment where every step, every gesture, and every interaction was mediated by invisible but very real constraints. The psychological toll, insiders suggest, was immediate and profound. And yet, Meghan pressed on. Despite the interventions, she continued to engage politely, smile for cameras, and attempt conversation. But the presence of security, combined with the invisible social barriers, made every interaction feel monitored and limited. Every move she made was observed, measured, and subtly redirected. For someone who thrives on agency, influence, and visibility, the experience was both jarring and humiliating. By the time the awards presentations were underway, it was clear that the presence of security had shifted from precautionary to regulatory. Meghan's movements, visibility, and interactions were no longer guided by convenience or courtesy. They were actively controlled. And for a woman of her experience and public awareness, the realization of this containment was likely impossible to ignore. The night was far from over, but the stage was set. Security had stepped in, subtly but unmistakably, signaling to Meghan and everyone else in the room that the gala was a carefully orchestrated environment in which her presence was being managed. What had begun as subtle social tension had escalated into tangible, physical oversight. And this intervention would be the catalyst for the dramatic moments that followed. Even in a room filled with elegance, glamour, and carefully curated charm, the human instinct to gossip and judge never sleeps. At the L'Oréal Paris 20th Anniversary Women of Worth Gala, the murmurs began quietly. Soft words passed between tables, subtle glances exchanged across the room, but they quickly grew louder, sharper, and impossible to ignore. These whispers, the first audible signs of social judgment, would mark the beginning of a chain reaction that would culminate in one of the most shocking moments of the evening: Meghan Markle's abrupt exit. At first, the whispers were almost imperceptible. A brief comment here, a quiet murmur there. Did she really just? One guest reportedly asked under her breath. I didn't expect her to show up like that. Another whispered, glancing subtly in Meghan's direction. The words were soft, but the intent was unmistakable. Meghan's presence was under scrutiny, her every action a topic of discussion. In such elite circles, whispers function as social currency. They signal disapproval, solidarity, or alignment, and they can influence perceptions far more than overt confrontation. Observers noted that the whispers were accompanied by subtle physical cues. Heads tilted slightly away, smiles became measured, and body language suggested caution or judgment. Even those who were not actively participating in the murmuring seemed to adjust their behavior, creating invisible boundaries around Meghan. For someone attuned to social nuance, and Meghan Markle is famously perceptive, this was impossible to miss. She was being subtly contained not just by security, but by the social currents of the room itself. And then came the gasps. Unlike whispers, which are covert, gasps are involuntary, audible, and impossible to ignore. A guest would react to an interaction, another to a photo opportunity, and a ripple of audible astonishment moved through the crowd. Insiders report that the first gasp occurred when Meghan, attempting to engage with a group of honorees, was redirected by a staff member, prompting a visible pause and a quick, shocked intake of breath from several attendees. The room's energy shifted instantly. Where there had been polite chatter, a charged tension emerged, drawing attention to Meghan's movements and amplifying the sense of scrutiny. It's important to understand the psychological impact of this combination. Whispers create an environment of judgment. Gasps make it public. Together, they amplify the pressure exponentially. Meghan, already navigating subtle exclusion and security interventions, now faced a room in which every step, every gesture, every glance was being observed, commented upon, and, in some cases, silently critiqued. The social pressure was immense. Even someone with experience under the global media spotlight would feel the weight of such intense scrutiny. Sources indicate that Meghan attempted to maintain her composure, engaging politely when possible and smiling when appropriate. But the whispers and gasps created a feedback loop. The more she was observed, the more attention her actions drew, and the more the room responded, whether intentionally or not. This dynamic is common in elite social environments. Visibility and judgment are inextricably linked. For Meghan, every attempt to assert normalcy only heightened the awareness of her presence. The whispers also carried content that insiders would later describe as particularly pointed. Some questioned her right to be present, others critiqued her attire or demeanor, and a few questioned her influence within the room. While none of these remarks were made directly to her face, the collective weight of observation was palpable. In such an environment, indirect judgment can feel as intense, if not more so, than direct confrontation. Meghan, accustomed to being in control of her public image, was encountering a social environment where control was being subtly stripped away. Then, as the evening progressed, the whispers began to escalate. Conversations paused mid-sentence when she passed. Laughter softened or stopped entirely. Eyes followed her movements with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Even staff and organizers, while maintaining professionalism, reportedly reinforced subtle boundaries, guiding her away from certain areas or limiting her engagement with key figures. The room had transformed from a celebration into a social minefield, and Meghan was navigating it with careful awareness of each potential misstep. The gasps became more frequent during moments of attempted interaction. Each time Meghan approached a cluster of honorees, photographers, or influential guests, a visible intake of breath accompanied the attention. Some gasps were likely due to surprise at her presence. Others, insiders speculate, were reactions to her being subtly redirected or isolated. The result was the same. The room was acutely aware of her, and the social pressure continued to mount. Observers noted that Meghan's awareness of these reactions added to her internal calculation. She likely recognized that every action, however polite or professional, was being interpreted and judged. This awareness, combined with the physical presence of security and the carefully managed VIP list, created a sense of confinement, a psychological tension that would only grow as the night continued. Even outwardly composed, insiders suggest that Meghan was internally processing the implications of whispers and gasps, considering how to navigate the escalating social dynamics. It is also important to consider the role of optics in this environment. Cameras were capturing the evening in real time, and social media amplified every subtle reaction. A whispered comment or a discreet gasp, once captured on film, becomes content for analysis, speculation, and debate. What might have been a private, controlled social signal quickly transforms into public commentary. For Meghan, the stakes were not merely social, they were global. Every reaction in that room had the potential to be interpreted, amplified, and circulated around the world. As the tension escalated, insiders describe a moment of visible unease. Meghan attempted to engage with another cluster of honorees, but the pattern repeated: polite smiles, subtle distancing, and whispers that carried just beyond earshot. The combination of containment, judgment, and observation created an environment in which even simple actions, greeting someone, moving through the room, or posing for a photo, felt fraught. For a person accustomed to controlling narratives, This was both psychologically taxing and emotionally challenging. The whispers and gasps were not isolated. They were part of a feedback loop that shaped the trajectory of the evening. Each reaction reinforced the others, amplifying social pressure, increasing visibility, and creating an atmosphere in which Meghan's presence was simultaneously noticed and restricted. It is a dynamic that few can endure without discomfort, and insiders suggest that this mounting tension was instrumental in the dramatic events that would follow. By the time the gala reached its midpoint, the combination of whispers, gasps, subtle exclusions, and security interventions had established a clear pattern. Meghan was being contained, observed, and subtly marginalized, and the social environment was actively reinforcing that pattern. Even her attempts to assert normal engagement were filtered through the lens of scrutiny and judgment. The whispers and gasps had set the stage for a psychological tipping point, one that would soon manifest in a very public and dramatic way. The key question arises: how does one respond when social pressure reaches such intensity, when subtle exclusion escalates into visible, public scrutiny, and when the environment seems designed to constrain influence and visibility? For Meghan Markle, the answer would come swiftly and shockingly later in the evening. Because the whispers and gasps were just the opening act. The social currents they created were about to collide with a moment that would make headlines, spark global discussion, and define the night in a way no one anticipated. In every high-profile gala, there are moments of tension, subtle or overt, that can shift the entire atmosphere of the evening. At the L'Oréal Paris 20th Anniversary Women of Worth Gala, the whispers, gasps, and carefully orchestrated containment had been building like a storm cloud. By the time the confrontation occurred, the social pressure had reached a boiling point, and the atmosphere in the room was charged with anticipation, though no one yet knew the scale of what was about to unfold. The confrontation began subtly. Sources inside the gala describe a moment when Meghan Markle attempted to approach a group of honorees for a brief interaction. Her intention was simple: offer congratulations, exchange pleasantries, and align herself with the celebration of women being honored that evening. But as she moved closer, it became immediately apparent that this interaction was not going to proceed smoothly. A cluster of staff, previously discreet, stepped subtly into her path, creating a physical barrier. Simultaneously, several attendees shifted positions, effectively isolating her from the group. To the casual observer, this may have seemed like an ordinary movement of staff or a minor logistical adjustment. But for someone like Meghan, trained to read social cues and accustomed to navigating complex environments, the intervention carried unmistakable weight. She was being deliberately controlled and prevented from engaging. The message was clear. Her presence in that particular moment was not welcome. It was at this point that the first words of confrontation occurred. According to insiders, a high-ranking organizer approached Meghan, offering a polite but firm explanation. Certain areas were restricted, certain interactions needed to be managed, and the evening had a carefully planned flow. While phrased as protocol, the subtext was unmistakable. Her presence had been scrutinized and her movement needed to be guided. Meghan, known for her poise and diplomatic skill, reportedly maintained a calm demeanor but responded with subtle assertiveness, questioning why such restrictions were being imposed on her specifically. The tension escalated as both parties navigated the exchange. Observers described Meghan's tone as measured yet firm, balancing politeness with an underlying challenge. The organizer, equally composed, reinforced the boundaries, citing security concerns and the importance of maintaining order. This was not a verbal battle, but a social and psychological confrontation, an intricate dance of control, influence, and visibility. Every word, gesture, and glance carried layered meaning. Meanwhile, the surrounding guests were acutely aware that a confrontation was taking place. Whispers intensified, and subtle glances were exchanged. Some attendees attempted to offer quiet support, while others leaned in with curiosity, observing how the tension would unfold. In high-profile events, confrontations, even subtle ones, are magnified, becoming a spectacle not just for those present, but for the broader audience, both live and online. As the exchange continued, Meghan reportedly pushed back against the imposed limitations. She attempted to assert her right to engage with the honorees, to navigate the space on her own terms, and to participate fully in the evening's proceedings. Yet every attempt was met with structured resistance. Staff subtly redirected her, organizers reiterated boundaries, and influential guests maintained their distance. The confrontation became a visible struggle between individual agency and orchestrated control, played out in a room filled with witnesses. It is worth noting the psychological intensity of this moment. Meghan, a figure used to commanding attention and navigating high-pressure environments, was now faced with a setting where her influence was being constrained by invisible rules and subtle enforcement. Every step required careful calculation. Every gesture was scrutinized. Every word exchanged carried the potential for misinterpretation. The room had become a microcosm of power dynamics, social hierarchy, and perception management, and Meghan was at the center. The situation escalated further when a photographer attempted to capture the interaction. Cameras flashed, amplifying the tension. In high-profile social settings, photographic evidence transforms subtle confrontations into visible drama. The optics alone create pressure, as every gesture can be interpreted, critiqued, and disseminated instantly. For Meghan, who understands the power of